Hello, everybody. Thank you all for joining us tonight for this presentation from James Castle House resident Emily Culver. Before we get started, I would like to address a few housekeeping items. We are committed to making this program accessible and are integrating accessibility through American Sign Language interpretation and English language captions. Captions are available by clicking on the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen and then selecting Show Subtitle. My name is Kristen Hill, and I am with the Boise City Department of Arts and History's Cultural Sites program, which runs the James Castle House. I'm here tonight with Lavona Andrew, who will be providing ASL interpretation for this event, and of course, Emily Culver. For anyone unfamiliar with us, the James Castle House celebrates the life and work of American artist James Castle through exhibitions, community programs, research, residency programs, and conservation of the historic spaces where Castle lived and worked for over 4 decades. The James Castle House is a program of the Boise City Department of Arts and History, which offers many other services, including public art, history programs, archives, cultural grants, and care and conservation. So I want to thank the City of Boise for its ongoing support and for remaining committed to our work at the Arts and History Department. We would also like to acknowledge the broader history of the land the James Castle House sits on. We recognize the ancestral, cultural, traditional, and unceded territory of the Shoshone, Bannock, and Northern Paiute people whose land the site is on today. So thank you again for joining us today and for your continued support of the arts and cultural community. Before we jump into things, I would just like to mention that we have extended the run of our current exhibition titled Ways of Knowing. This beautiful exhibition was thoughtfully created by guest curator Andre Merrill, who has worked closely with James Castle's artwork for more than 2 decades, working as the collection manager for the James Castle Collection and Archive. Merrill selected over 130 pieces of artwork to share, which give us a glimpse of the depth and breadth of Castle's immense body of work. So we are so happy to be able to share this exhibition with a wider audience over the next few months. And now on to the main event. We are so excited for Emily Culver to share with us tonight. After her presentation, we will have a question and answer period, so please feel free to write your thoughts and questions in the Q&A throughout the presentation, and we will address them at the end. Emily Culver is a self-described object maker whose work spans media and references existing systems and tools to question their perceived purpose and our relationship to them. Originally from Pennsylvania, Culver is now living in Norfolk, Virginia, where she teaches full-time at Old Dominion University. Culver attended Tyler School of Art, Temple University in Philadelphia, where she received her Bachelor of Fine Arts in Metals, Jewelry, CAD-CAM, and earned her Master's of Fine Arts in Metalsmithing from Cranbrook Academy of Arts in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. One more time, in Cranbrook Academy of Art in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. She has received various awards over the years, such as the Stuart Thompson Haystack Fellowship, Toby Devan Lewis Fellowship, and a grant from the Foundation for Contemporary Arts. And her work has been exhibited both nationally and internationally. So Emily's residency marks her first time visiting Boise. Her 10-week term began in mid-May and will wrap up at the end of July. We are so excited to welcome her to the James Castle House, and we can't wait to see the exciting things she makes while she's here. We will have several opportunities for you to engage with Emily and her work, both in person and online, just to learn more about Emily and her practice. We will tell you about those later. And now I will turn things over to Emily.
Thank you so much, Kristen. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for taking the time this evening to hear me talk about my work and to spend it here together. I just wanted to add that the exhibition next door that I'm currently living next to is fabulous. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. So, as Kristen mentioned, in 2012, I received my Bachelor of Fine Art from Tyler School of Art in Philadelphia, where I studied traditional jewelry and metalsmithing, but also computer-aided design, which is also referred to as CAD-CAM. At this moment in my life, I had all of this education and training and understanding of jewelry and how it related to the body. But I had begun to push the conventions of what that looked like and how that relationship could be defined. So I'm going to begin my presentation with the work that I made in 2013, so right after undergraduate. So at this moment, I found myself in a totally new situation that I wasn't very accustomed to. I was working on my own, divorced from an academic institution with all of this newly acquired knowledge of making, but without any of the same resources. So I chose to elaborate on my interest of materials like silicone and urethane rubbers, and this sort of fascination and compulsion for touch and physical engagement. I feel we are curious humans, and our attention is held by things that recall our own corporeal qualities. When something responds to our touch, or maybe it models how we are made by design, I feel that's something that we are often captivated and fascinated by. I was interested in the compulsory, innate, and sometimes embarrassing desires that we have for touch and for pleasure. And I was interested in sensations brought on by engaging with these types of materials and by engaging with these forms and the curious ways in which they can be worn on the body. Like this piece, for instance, which actually suctions directly to the body. It can be released by squeezing the urethane component there at the bottom, which then releases the suction, and as you can see on the right there, leaves some subtle bruising on the shoulder. So what I'm most interested in with this piece is its ability to leave its impression on the wearer. As a student of jewelry, I was often frustrated by the idea that objects I made were not autonomous in their own right, that they were supplemental to the body, not only because they were craft, but because they were also jewelry. Myself as an artist, I'm not interested in conventional ideas of ornamentation in my work. I'm not engaged with superfluous things or modes of making. I'm not really excited by excess. And so it's this conflict that I have with much of my field of research and working within the decorative arts that makes it a really interesting but complicated relationship. So for me, the fact that taking this piece off left the body changed, that was what I was really interested in. The physical engagement here was not dismissible. And then this is the last piece that I'll show in that small body of work. The aesthetics for these works I was employing were somewhere between a biological extension of the body and perhaps some type of equipment that you would put on for some activity or for some laborious work. And the images of these objects when they're worn play an important role in how the works are read. So without this clear narration of how one interacts or wears them, information would be lost. So for example, the bruising of the skin being the most obvious in this situation. There's a directness in experiencing viewing both the object and the image in the space. So for my more recent works that I'm going to show you, I've mostly abandoned this form of documentation. The only time that I reintroduce the body is when I am making a reference to scale. And I've made this decision consciously because I want to further broaden conversation surrounding what exactly is this and how do I interact with it. So in 2015, I attended Cranbrook Academy of Art near Detroit, where I received my Master's of Fine Art in Metalsmithing. And I'm going to be showing you work in a more or less chronological order. So after exploring wearable works, or also known as jewelry, for a time, I was curious what other types of relationships could happen between an object and the body. And so at this point in my practice, I was really intrigued by ideas surrounding tools. So utility, concepts of function or non-function, as well as communicative affordances. So to explain a little bit, communicative affordances are the parts of objects that tell us what they are and how to use them. So for example, a handle or the opening of a vessel tells us what it is. Also at this time, I'm starting to question what type of physical engagement one could possibly have with an object and what the difference between those interactions might be. So for example, how does the level of intimacy change between an exchange of the hand versus the mouth? So much of the work that you're going to be seeing, I'm trying to use these types of mechanisms and devices for communication, but introduce these seemingly familiar languages in a new and different way. I see many of these pieces exhibiting various functions and purposes, almost as if they exist within many possibilities simultaneously regarding their potential for movement and for transition. As objects that thwart their proposed purpose or whose intentions can be difficult to read, I find that my works often deny expectation and performance. I have in the past, and I still do, often use photography as a tool in thinking about and contextualizing the work that I make. I will often introduce the objects that I make into environments to contextualize them differently, or perhaps as a way to imagine the aspects that are at play and how I then might bring them back into a gallery setting. I'm interested in the dialogue that objects create when they become situated with other things. And I often compare this effect to how just one word in a sentence can implicate the rest. How all it takes is one thing to change the conversation at hand. And I use words like object and thing purposefully because of the differences between them, which fascinates me. An object is a word that we use in reference to something we feel we know and that we understand. While a thing, on the other hand, is something perhaps situated in a gray or fluid space that feels just too slippery to pin down with such exact language. In all of what I do, I think about the body. I consider all materials, surfaces, forms in relation to the body, whether it be how one sees corporeal qualities in flexible rubbers, the way in which unglazed ceramic records touch, or how pristine metal surfaces fetishize physical engagement. So I had the opportunity to attend Haystack in the summer between my first and second year of graduate school. I attended a woodworking class there, and this was also my first introduction to CNC milling, which would later inform some of the larger works that I'm going to show you later. And this craft school, along with a few others, play an important part in my journey as an artist. So I'm going to highlight a few of those experiences. So these were some of the works that I made during that time. And just to explain a little bit, if you're not familiar with the process of CNC milling, it's a machine that has a bit. So if you think of something similar to a drill bit, and they come in different sizes and different ends, shapes. But the machine, by way of a computer, moves up and down, left to right, and front to back as it removes material strategically. And this is a 3-axis CNC. There's also a 5-axis, which is far more complicated. So basically it carves away material. I consider the objects that I make to be bodies in their own right. I see skinness in color, texture, but also in the metaphorical function and longing for and responsiveness to touch. So for this piece, for example, I feel that the poetic nature of the hinge, which is there between the two rectangular forms, is its ability to bring these objects together, but also repel them apart. Always linked, but there is a searching for position in relation to one another. Always shifting, always adjusting. Like holding hands, you could think about. I see many of these objects as fluid things that convey ideas of physical change, transference, and exchange, that something might be shifting and realigning just below the surface. In my work, there is often a productive frustration in considering what is attainable, what is accessible, and what is totally untouchable. Because I feel that some things in this world retain their magic exactly because we can't fully know them. So at this time in graduate school, I'm finding language from object-oriented ontology, queer and feminist theories that describe this type of lingering but slippery identity that I hope for my work to embody. An existence that could feel present, autonomous, but simultaneously transitional and just a bit fuzzy around the edges. So I'd like to read this quote for you that's by Graham Harman in regard to object-oriented ontology, who writes, "We can only be hunters of objects, and must even be non-lethal hunters, because objects can never be caught. The world is filled primarily not with electrons of human praxis, but with ghostly objects withdrawing from all human and inhuman access, accessible only by illusion and seducing us by means of allure. Whatever we capture, whatever table we sit at or destroy, is not the real table." So now we've come to the conclusion of my time at Cranbrook and this piece in particular. When I made this piece and it was situated in the museum for our degree show, some patrons went as far as to pick it up to examine it closer in the museum. I feel this again talks about the bodily quality of eliciting touch that I discussed before. It's a handheld object, it's shiny, tucked away in a hard to view place, so people can't help but want to touch it. And so now this piece is patinaed and freckled with all sorts of fingerprints, a sort of record of all of the physical interactions that it's had. So I built this piece, and then I built this piece in which it lived for that degree show. It was nestled in one of the many belly basins there. Much of my work up until this point was considering how a singular body might interact with an object and what that relationship might look like. So here with this piece, I feel it's negotiating a multitude of relationships around it and even amongst all of the placeholders here. So I wanted to include some of the process shots just to explain a little bit of how I construct some of these things. So for this piece in particular, I built it in a modeling program called Rhinoceros. And then I split it into multiple 2-inch sections that could be CNC milled, which is the process I discussed before. So once they were all cut, I then assembled them and finished them by hand. Just about all of my work begins in the computer in one way or another, even if I'm only using it as a sketching device to work out composition, scale, or maybe mechanics. Although I use the computer in an aid in developing work, all of my work is also made by hand. And so it's all of these tools I use to various degrees. So I received a Toby Devan Lewis Fellowship for that work, which I used to support my practice during my first artist residency. So everything that I said, these are all ideas that I still think about today and that I still chew on. So once I completed my master's, I quickly transitioned to a residency at Arrowmont School of Arts and Craft, where I lived and worked for 11 months. And Arrowmont is another one of those craft schools, and it's located in Tennessee. So these are the works that I made over that 11 months. This body of work I call self-object. And a self-object in psychology terms is an external thing that becomes the focus of transference. So they're persons, objects, or activities that complete the self and allow the self to function. This was an earlier work that I completed during that residency. And at this time, I'm really starting to decompress and unpack some of my prior experiences and consider where I was now. This piece in particular recalls a very specific memory. An acquaintance of mine in graduate school had spoken to me once of this idea of male restlessness. And it didn't sit quite well with me. So I made this tongue-in-cheek piece where I fabricated this metal object that you see on the right to become my surrogate manhood. It could collect all types of bodily fluids and dispel them from a single exit point located on the underside. I wanted to show another way of how I'm constructing some of these things. So a method that I developed is that I build the object in my 3D modeling program. I then have the program collapse that 3D model, all of the planes, into flat pieces, which I can then cut, form, and fabricate in metal. So here's a little visual to explain that process. So I have the object built as a 3D model. I then pull out one of those complex sides of the object, which would be difficult to develop a pattern just through working through geometry and math. And then I can take that, I print it, and then I have a perfect pattern that I then use and fabricate in metal. So this is a process that's proved extremely useful for me. With this work, I was fixated on the idea of the dichotomy of self and representing the frustration that I feel at times of being an embodiment of a contradiction. With this work, there's a lot of potential to relate its form and its behavior to the body. As a collection of objects, these works are a reflection of adolescence for me. Adolescence being a time when bodies change. Again, this is the same enameled surface that I showed you earlier. Each tile here was individually enameled, arranged, and then assembled. And then these plug-like forms are fabricated. This piece for me recalls memories of resurfacing feelings of embarrassment, vulnerability, shame, but also sorrow. Generally speaking, I'm interested in the idea of plugs being a catalyst for change. They are objects used to keep fluid contained to a specific desired area. So when you look at this one here, supposedly it's divorced from whatever job it was supposed to do. So, it begs the question, what might be happening elsewhere because it has abandoned its post? And I'm so drawn to these types of bathroom and bathing environments because they recall feelings of intimacy with oneself, secret uncomfortableness, as well as privacy. So after my residency in Tennessee, I moved to Virginia, where I began teaching at Virginia Commonwealth University. And before I move on to another larger body of work, I wanted to briefly talk about two projects that I completed around this time. So this first project considered the idea of voyeurism. And this piece was made possible through a grant from the Foundation for Contemporary Arts, and it took place in Baltimore at School 33. This work is called Labor of Suggestion. It's an installation that's devoted to inhibiting and obscuring direct access. So the voyeur's gaze in this space becomes obstructed by a thin film. I think of it as a type of skin barrier that reduces the silhouette and the detail of the contents to a fuzzy blur. So here's another view also within that same space. So with this piece, I'm considering the active part of looking and discerning knowledge through that process. And then the second was a curatorial project that I was invited to participate in called Side Effects. It was about 20 artists or so, half from the United States, half from Europe. And we were asked to submit a concept, receive a concept, and make 2 works in response to both of those concepts. So this is the piece that I made in response to the concept that I received. And I was trying to, in this work, represent many of the various contradictions that are in the text. So for example, order, chaos, potential to real, far, near, etc. And then this is the piece that I made in response to the project or the concept that I submitted for the project. So this is a brooch, worn on the chest that utilizes a mirrored acrylic to have a sort of falling effect in the center there. And this was made in reference to an article written by Timothy Morton, who's a philosopher who's done extensive work at the intersection of object-oriented thinking and ecological studies. So he wrote a publication for the Baltic Atlas and this was just a small excerpt from it, but it talks about thingness being a thing and also a portal, and how a portal is a thing. So I found that quite fascinating. So the following works that I'm going to show culminated in a solo exhibition of jewelry, objects, and images that I exhibited at the Baltimore Jewelry Center in 2019. And for this work, I introduced some new concepts really around ideas of substance and materiality. I was considering more the metaphysical qualities of my work. I think even particularly because my work so often transitions from a digital space to a physical, and then back to a digital or an image representation. So what you're looking at here is another brooch that's mounted on a wallpaper backdrop that I created. And to the left of the brooch, embedded within the texture pattern, is an optical illusion known as a stereogram. So things that I was thinking about in this exhibition were creating pieces that fell in an in-between space, somewhere between converging, dissipating, vibrating. There's a lot of suggestion of parts and particles, again, utilizing imagery and pattern. And through all of this work, I wanted to acknowledge the gaps, the space between the stuff that actually happens, and how that new space can become a point of entry. So this is a photo of the space where the works were installed. And the title for this exhibition was Into, Not Through. My intent with the title was to create a visual and textual representation of this suspension of space and of being. So in the center there was a standing basin form that I made in much the same way as I made the other larger works that I showed you earlier. And then scattered throughout were a collection of jewelry and objects. And you can see the wallpaper behind the piece there. And on top of the wallpaper were a pair of brooches that looked like this. This is both the front and the back. Their forms describe imagery of forms in flux, so a coming together or pulling apart, much like mitosis. And then this is a little GIF that I made that I feel illustrates that idea. They were named Numbra and Penumbra, respectively, which describes the different parts of shadows. So from the darker shaded area out, moving towards those that become lighter in color. So there was a lot of pattern play happening in this work. And my intent with that was to move these associations back and forth of relating matter as it exists to the physical spaces around us, to how our very bodies are expressions of these composites as well. So I mentioned before that I have a special affinity for bathrooms, and this is for many reasons. Because these spaces for me somehow feel like the only true private places where one experiences so much vulnerability and introspection. So I think about how even the fixtures and materials of these spaces can become metaphors for these experiences or recall these experiences. So looking here at the basin from the other side, you can see an object sitting along the rim, just like you might find a bar of soap or a drain pool, for example. And so here's a close-up of that object. And for this exhibition, I wanted to explore image making in more than just one way. So what you're seeing here is a textile made from netting beads together in a gridded pattern that was proportionate to my personal bathroom at the time. So with this piece, I was considering the collection of matter, what sort of material gathers in the cracks and how configuring that material could mark out or trace a physical space. So I photographed this piece on my tiled floor. And then I presented it in the gallery with a plastic overlay, which I feel further distorted the image, pulling it back to the wallpaper. But it also had this sort of foggy feeling, as though the glass in the room had become distorted with condensation. And then the actual beaded piece was also present in the space. It was folded and hung on a fabricated towel rack, much like a hand towel would be found. I think a lot about how time and environments shape and change the body, and how we can distinguish time through these changes, how freckles of summer may fade, or how we seasonally shed both our summer and winter skins for new ones, and then how even that shed skin can become loose matter in the world. I see that quality with this piece too, the relationship between a seemingly hard shell that's impenetrable, but then these soft, fleshy insides that become vulnerable when exposed, like a new skin that pushes out the old. So this was the last piece that I made in 2019, not part of the exhibition, but this was right before 2020 when everything changed. So my practice as of late, or 2020 to 22, wasn't very active. I continued to teach at craft schools, sometimes virtually. I also moved to Norfolk, Virginia, where I accepted a full-time teaching position at Old Dominion. But I want to show you a few works that I have finished up more recently. So this piece was the first that I made when I had started my new position, and concealed on the interior of the wooden shelf here is a silicone element that's suspended in a mid-drip. So with a few of these newer works that I'm going to show you, I'm considering the value of disruptions. This is a piece that I completed around the same time. It's a brooch where, again, I'm thinking about that grid pattern as a sampling of a tiled surface, as if you could cut it out and wear it around. And so for me, the silver here and the set stones are again attempting to draw attention to the places and spaces that are often overlooked in the grout. And I struggled with these stones. You know, it's so easy to be drawn to things that sparkle and shine. This is why I'm so interested and frustrated with jewelry. So I sandblasted them so that they turned into little pink blisters. And then, still thinking about stone setting as this act of catching and holding something in place, I set a stone in the corner of the box, like some sort of insignificant something that got swept into the corner and forgotten there. So these are two works that I call inheritance, and they reference outdated medical irrigation equipment that mirrors outdated ideas surrounding historically marginalized bodies. So in these works, I reflect upon the societal, generational, and familial attributes that one inherits, acknowledging that sometimes these qualities are not always desirable. And so again, to give you a little idea of some process, to achieve forms like this, it's many months of labor for me. So what you're seeing here is a small sampling of that process starting in the upper left-hand corner. But I take metal and I hammer it over a steel stake, different shapes, in a process called raising, which develops form. And then from there, all of the other components are also fabricated. So in 2018 and 2020, I obtained injuries to my body that have left it forever changed. The asymmetry of broken and healed joints, coupled with numbness, limited motion, and pain, have become persistent reminders of these events and that my body is changing. It's morphing into something that I no longer recognize. And so at the James Castle House, I find myself at a crossroads of this evolution, while I'm absorbing and reflecting on what it means to be here in this body and in this space. But I'm not going to give you any spoilers of what I've been working on lately, but I really look forward to sharing my journey with all of you over the next few weeks. And I really hope that any of you that are able to come out to the open studio events, I would love to see you then. And I would love to take your questions too.
Thank you so much, Emily. That was fascinating. I love seeing all the video, the GIFs that you've created. I don't know that I've seen any of those before, and they're great. They add a lot to the body of work.
Thank you. Yeah, something fun and new that I've been experimenting with.
It seems like you're pretty comfortable experimenting with different materials of all kinds.
Yes, as I think I've mentioned to a few folks, I think of myself as a problem maker and a problem solver. So always getting myself back into a corner or giving myself a predicament to try to figure out. And so that often includes a variety of media.
I love it. It's amazing. As long as you are eventually able to solve the problems you're creating, right?
I guess so, although the thing that you can't quite solve is the itch that you can never scratch. And so it's always there. Once you scratch it, then you're no longer interested in it, right?
Yeah. And then you have to create another problem.
Yes, always.
So just to announce to our audience, please drop any questions or comments you have in the Q&A, and I am going to start with what we've got there and just keep going. So, you know, we've got another 15, 20 minutes, so take your time. We have our first question. Could you tell us about your idea generation process? How do you turn an abstracted feeling into an object?
Great. And I can see this is coming from Oz. Hi, Oz. Nice to see you. My idea generation process varies. Sometimes I have a question that I'm trying to figure out, like kind of like a speculative design. So, if I was to try to achieve this feeling or create something that made this effect on the body, what would that look like? How would I get to that point? So sometimes it comes from trying to, again, figure out that question. Other times I'm just really inspired by the poetics of a material or of a form. So it really varies piece to piece. And I think sometimes you can tell with individual works that I'll just get caught up in a material or a texture or a surface. And then other times the idea is a little bit more fleshed out. So it varies. I do a lot of sketching. I do a lot of random writing, rambling thoughts that when I revisit those and experience them differently in a different space, in a different mindset, things usually click differently. And I like that because then I'm suddenly surprised again, or I revisit, like it's like the synapse has like made a connection once more. So I usually hold on to those materials and revisit them for future use.
So kind of jumping off from that, are you a collector of objects yourself? Does your work like really impact the way that you respond to objects? And do you ever incorporate those into your work or just the kind of what they inspire?
Yes. Although I would say I'm like a minimalist collector, probably on like the grand scheme of collector or, that process. But one thing too that I really love are like flooring samples. So I've written to many companies and they'll send you all of these samples of all of these great textures and patterns. And I keep a lot of those around for inspiration. And even now I'm doing some carving. So even finding odd objects that are made out of stone or plastic, I can reshape that into something new. So sometimes I'll collect weird random implements, cooking utensils, the things that I don't like. I look at it and I'm like, I don't know what this is. That's when I get most excited. So I usually hold on to those.
All right, we have got another question from Joshua Olson. Are you finding inspiration at the James Castle House studio, or is it too early to feel at home yet?
No, I'm definitely feeling very inspired. And I mean, for one, just having the time and the space to be with my thoughts has been great. But, seeing Castle's work in person and being on this physical site has me so much thinking day in and day out about his work. And this is only the start of it. I know that there's much more to discover, but I'm feeling very inspired. And you can't see it right now, but I have this beautiful view that I'm staring at of the Boise landscape. And I'm really enjoying it, feeling very much at home.
That's wonderful. We have another question. So Rachel Reichert is asking, can you talk about the surface and the colors? I may have missed this in the very beginning, but I'm curious about what your treatment or materials used in your metal surfaces.
In the metal surfaces specifically? Well, so some of those vary. Like, let's see if I can go back. I don't know if it will let me go back. Some things like these, for example, are metal surfaces that I've put together with like a composite of different metals using their coloration. So there's copper, brass, and bronze. And those were put together with this process that when I would teach it, I always thought it was so outdated, marriage of metals. But as I taught it to students, I finally found a way that if I created it in more of a pattern, in that there's multiple pieces that are repeated over and over, that to me felt very interesting. But I use a lot of, as far as surface treatments, I'm mostly drawn to, I would say, matte surfaces. So things that feel really soft. So I do a lot of sandblasting in my work, and I'll couple that with satin finishes. I try to like play with finishes. So smaller details to like fetishize them or make them really prominent. I'll high polish those, and then broader surfaces I'll leave more matte. I think it also makes a hierarchy of where your attention is drawn. But yeah.
That's fantastic. I am curious about, so you talked about sometimes carving or sculpting, and I have not seen much of that yet myself, but because your work is so, it seems like such a visceral relationship with, you know, physical sensation. Can you talk at all about like how different it is to approach work that you are cutting away from versus something that you are manipulating or building up?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you definitely, well, because you start with a mass of material and then you strategically make decisions. It's funny you asked that because I was thinking about it today as I'm like holding this piece in my hand and thinking about how every, like the step of how it gets from A to B is a series of decisions. Like, I don't need this material, so I'm going to get rid of it. I don't need this material. And so the handling of the materiality and also figuring out the way in which it cuts, like stone cuts differently than wood, for example, or plastic, and the type of tool that you need. It's a different body material relationship. Whereas when you start with a constant, which is sheet metal, although metal can come in many different forms, like you can casting grain, it comes in sheet, it comes in, you know, wire. When you start with a block of material, it's just very different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting. I'm also curious, talking about, you know, your different surfaces and how you're kind of creating a hierarchy by the different treatments of surfaces. Do you feel like you have an idea of material hierarchy in your head with what you're working with, or is everything kind of, I don't know, I guess, you know, are all of your materials equally weighted just according to their use?
I would say mostly yes. There's sometimes, so like I struggle with that, right? Like with the stones, for example, like I purposefully recognize, like when I was looking at these, I set them, like you cut the seeds, right, for the metal, then you set that stone in, and then I'm looking at it and I'm like moving it around in my hand and I'm watching the light bounce off of all of these facets, and I'm just thinking, ooh, this is so satisfying. But then I catch myself in that moment and I realize that, okay, yes, I love this, but does it do what I want it to do conceptually? Or am I really getting swept up in the material, and the material is almost working against me? Just, you know, because I want that moment to be there, but I don't need it to scream. Like it can be conversational. So like sometimes I will actually fight the material hierarchy or try to. Other times, like I made a whole piece once because I found these beautiful rubber bands. And I built an entire piece just to like show off these rubber bands. So for me, it's just like an instant love connection.
Mhm.
And if it talks to me, then I want to put it up on a pedestal. It doesn't matter whether it's the most costly thing ever or if it's some piece of trash.
Uh, I think I really appreciate that about your work. Is it's not, I guess it seems like you don't approach it in a way that's like, if it's made out of this material, then it's in the ideation phase. And then when it's made out of this, that means it's a finished work, that kind of any material is valid.
Yeah.
So you've been in Boise for not quite, just over 2 weeks now, right? Yes. So what are your initial impressions
Of Boise?
of all the things, of Boise, of the Castle
All the
House?
things?
Like what? Yeah.
Well, Boise's given me such beautiful white puffy clouds for the majority of the time that I've been here. I've been so impressed biking around, just being like, oh my God, look at this blue sky. So I've been so impressed with the amount of sunshine and blue skies and puffy white Toy Story clouds that I've had. So I've really enjoyed that, and being in the neighborhood that the James Castle House is in. I'm loving biking around and seeing all of the homes here, and the neighbors have been so welcoming. I've gotten homemade bread brought to the studio, which has been fabulous. And then, seeing the castle house and the other buildings has been such a unique, special experience. Like, I'm coming to Castle's work more or less for the first time, so I feel really privileged to experience it in this way. It feels extremely immersive, like I'm really diving in. And so I can't really explain that, what it's, like I said, meant to be here in this place at this time. But it's been a journey already, and I can only theorize of where it might go, but I'm excited.
I think it's incredible to have that experience of kind of being more or less introduced to this work with such a, the exhibition that we have up right now is, probably the widest variety of works we've ever shown, at least on the scale that we have. So you're really walking into the situation and like just getting, dipped in the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's like been very immersive. And to like peek out the window and see the shed, being shown the trailer. I mean, it's just, it just puts things in a very different context.
So you were talking about just kind of the experience the other day about the experience of living with your work, of like waking up in the same space, and that kind of the different dynamic that creates. Can you just talk a little bit about that and how you feel like it's impacting you so far?
Yeah, well, I think that it feels like such a gift. It's like a gift and a burden at the same time, because on one hand, all I have to do is think and be creative and just make. Wake up, walk over to studio space, enjoy being here, and then, go to bed. And so I think there's definitely there's like a small bit of anxiety that comes with that, because you feel like you've been given such a great opportunity. You want to make the most of it. You want to do yourself justice. You want to do the residency option. But I think like once you get over that and understand that, there is this ebb and flow, one moment, and that's kind of been my whole practice, the story of my whole practice. One day it's tears, and the next day, or the next minute, it's laughter. But I guess it's all about the journey, right?
Mhm. And I think, you know, speaking to the experience of being immersed in castle and all things castle, you know, riding around and seeing the fluffy white clouds in the Boise landscape is just as much a part of that as the work.
I
So
think so too.
it's
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. I think, and it also feels like, um, I feel like this experience is, as much as it's about me and the work I'm making, it's also, it's like you said, about me being in relation, or like in this sort of conversation with this totally different artist, like across history, across time. And I don't think that I can be present in that conversation if I'm always consumed with with myself, you know?
Yeah,
So yeah.
absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah. Um, so is working in a non-metals studio space feeling limited? And what did you bring with you? And are you making work based on what you have access to?
Good question. Well, I tried to be really strategic. Generally speaking, metalsmithing requires a lot of tools and equipment, but I have lots of hand tools. I have a soldering setup. I even have some stakes for forming. The Castle House has a 3D printer that I've been enjoying and giving some test run or test drives. And it's been great. And I think that I didn't bring everything with me because I told myself, Emily, you're an overpacker. You have 10 weeks. There's no way that you can do all of the things. And I also wanted to leave room to just be inspired and not feel committed um, to one thing in particular, because that felt really important, being able to respond. But I got lots of toys.
I've seen a little bit of it so far, and I'm really, really excited to see all of what happens next. All right, well, it looks like we are running out of time here. Emily, thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us tonight. Before we wrap up completely, I just want to reiterate that we have several opportunities for you to engage with Emily in the coming weeks. So she will be hosting 3 Saturday open studio events on June 18th and 25th and July 2nd from 2 to 3 p.m. So if you're in town, please stop by and meet Emily and see her work in person, which will be amazing. We will have a final presentation taking place online on Friday, July 22nd. And the following day, Saturday, July 23rd, we will have an in-person flash show where Emily will share her work and her experience from the residency. So again, Emily, thank you so much. We're so excited to have you at the Castle House and to spend the summer with you. It will be amazing. And thank you all for joining us. We really hope that you are able to join us for future events. Thank you so much, Lavona, for interpreting tonight's presentation. I say this every time, but we've worked with Lavona since the very beginning of James Castle House days, and she's incredible. It's always such a pleasure to work with her. So if you have any questions, please reach out to us. All of Emily's events can be found online at jamescastlehouse.org, and feel free to drop us an email if you have questions. And everyone have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you.